As I was on the train up from Exmouth this morning, I was reflecting. I had, you know how sometimes you get little emails that sort of give you pings on things. And today I got an email that reminded me of what I was doing 26 years ago. And I don't know what you guys were all doing 26 years ago, but 26 years ago, I was bright and fresh in my new handmade by myself suit, going into my office to start my training as a chartered accountant. And not everyone in the room is old enough to remember, but many of you remember was that we were sort of in the depths of what was a fairly grotty recession, and I was really grateful to have a job. The week before I'd got married, I bought a house on 100% mortgage, and as you remember, the interest rates started to go a little bit doolally. And I was very pleased that I had a job, and also a little bit concerned because my monthly salary was going to be less than the interest payments on my mortgage. So that sort of feeling of uncertainty in the world and what's happening is something that never really goes away. And if you reflect back over the last 26 years on some of the things that have happened, you know, Sunday, as Richard, who works with me, was reminding me, Sunday is the 15th anniversary of 9/11. And, you know, events that have changed and shaped the world and given us a place where somehow, you know, there are challenges that maybe seemed esoteric when I was growing up that now seem to be really big fundamental challenges, and that we're at the risk of being maybe the first generation who pass on a world to our children that is less positive than the one that we inherited. Now, in business, I think that there are opportunities for us to think about how we can influence the world we're in. Certainly, having grown up through the profession and grown and built business units and developed amazing people and worked with amazing clients, I came to realise that I didn't want to be in a world where the world was just happening to me. I wanted to be doing something that was going to impact and change that world. And I knew in doing that that there were three things that I needed to do, which is one was, you know, they say that if you want to have a view on the world, you've got to view the world, to understand what really is happening, to bring that outside in, and to use that to influence how you think about your life, your business, and how you live it. I knew that taking those insights, then you had to take that inside into your own leadership journey, but also how you led within your organisation, how you enabled and brought others through. And then you had to think about how were you going to take that impact outside into the world? How are you really going to make a difference? And so I thought it'd be interesting just to explore some of those threads today and maybe see, as we go into conversation over coffee and stuff, the different stories and journeys that you've all got that you're bringing to life in your businesses. So that's starting of viewing the world and looking at the challenges that we face. And there are some pretty big ones that can seem really quite scary, aren't there? We've got the biggest migration that's happened in the world outside of any world war, the massive move from south to north, economic migrants and people fleeing from the most dreadful situations of war and abuse. You've got the massive move of economic power from west to east. And many of us thinking, well, how is that going to influence and shape? You know, should our children be learning Mandarin, not French and German? We've got a position where the world is reaching the limits of its sustainable resources. Estimates are that by 2020, 50% of the world will be living in water scarcity. 50% of the world. You know, when you look at a business like Unilever and why they've gone on their sustainability agenda, if you're a business that makes soap, you really need to pay attention to this stuff. You really need to pay attention to this stuff. So things that seemed esoteric are now really important for business to pay attention to. The growing middle class. Currently, the middle class in the world, about 2 billion, using the resources of 2 planets in their consumerism. That middle class, largely through growth in Asia and Africa, is scheduled to grow to 5 billion people by 2025? How will the world sustain these things, and how will we solve these challenges so that we have a sustainable, growing business world? Because we've had this narrative of growth and this assumption that businesses continue to grow because we've had really the limit probably on growth that we talk about most, and David and I were talking about, is we'll talk about finance. That's been our limit. Maybe talent. But actually some other things are becoming really important for us as businesses to think about. And these are some of the big challenges that seem to be important for us to pay attention to, because I know, and you know, that our businesses cannot grow and thrive if we're not in a world and an environment that is growing and thriving too. And we can sit back and then feel sad when we find that things that we thought were certain aren't. Or we can step forward and think about how can we influence and shift that in how we make a difference. We've also got some wonderful opportunities in the world we're in, haven't we? Because we now have this wonderful opportunity to be able to collaborate and connect with people as never before. You know, I can be, as I was this morning, you know, texting someone in India about an opportunity to do some work together. And then, you know, that's just a sort of a normal thing in my cup of tea. 26 years ago, I remember you had to book an international call still. You know, imagine that shift in the world. I can see there are some other people as old as me, so that's great. It's always reassuring on a Friday morning. So, you know, we're in this wonderful world where we can collaborate. We also know that the old way of doing business, where I've got an idea and I'm going to keep it really tight to myself, and I'm going to squeeze my hand really tight, and I'm going to get a diamond, and I'm going to keep it to myself. We know that that doesn't really create the most value, does it? That actually the most value comes when people are actually sharing and collaborating, sharing their ideas, sharing their resources, and coming together to actually create more value, more opportunity. And that's a new opportunity, something different. And as I look at the world and look at the challenges globally, but also in the UK, and particularly post-Brexit, what I see is that if we create an environment where we have businesses, where we have the public sector and government, and when we have the third sector and individuals collaborating together, then we have the possibility of really creating some change that will mean that we do make some effort at least to pass on a world that maybe isn't completely messed up for our kids. So that's the starting point of how I suppose I've been taking my leadership as a firm. Where do you start on something like that? Certainly in a professional services firm, when I look at the leadership and actually across business, what's expected of leaders? What's expected of leaders right now? Lucy Kellaway captured it beautifully in her article back in February, where she did some analysis of what were the top skills that CEOs needed. And she concluded that there was one, that you needed to be able to lie really well. Because the world expects you to be perfect, to have all the answers, and if something goes wrong, then, you know, really you have to cover it up. If you actually stand out and say, well, I got it wrong, then you're slaughtered for it. And we create an environment where leaders aren't actually able to be honest, to learn, to experiment, to grow, but an environment where actually it's really, really can be quite tough. So how do we shift that? And that was a question for me as I took on. And as Ollie says, you know, if I look at, you know, what's expected of a CEO of a large city firm, it's that I'm perfect, I'm an expert, and I've got all the answers, and I don't. I don't know about you guys, but even while I'm standing here, there will be things changing in the world out there that will mean that what I thought was the right plan yesterday won't be the right plan today. And there will be people in my business. We have 4,500 people in the UK and 20,000 around the world. 40,000 around the world. It's always good to get your numbers right as an accountant. Minor detail. But there will be people around the world who have got a lot better ideas than I have about how to achieve the outcome. And so that was the interesting thing for me, was one was in my personal leadership journey, how could I model and show that actually being a leader in the new world of one who's open to learning, to experiment, to feedback, that possibly that style of leadership was going to be much more generative than me pretending I was perfect and holding that burden on my shoulders. And the second one was, and how did I still that through an organisation of starting with our 4,500 people in the UK? And that was behind a lot of our decision to become a shared enterprise, which was this absolute belief that 6 people on my leadership team compared to 4,500 people thinking, bringing their ideas. Do the maths, which one's going to be more powerful? And so how we could do that was really important. How do you shift that so that when your people are walking through your door, instead of thinking they're coming in to do a job, they've actually got that opportunity to really connect with what they're doing, to generate ideas and to produce work which they, as well as you, are proud of. And that was our opportunity. How did we enable people to share their ideas, share responsibility, and also to share the reward in actually what they produced? And I boiled it down into, I think, 3 things in terms of attitude of mind that I thought would be helpful to leave with you. One was really about thinking about living with purpose. We started with asking people what was important to them, what really matters to people. That wonderful Aristotle test, it's the end of your life and there's something written in a tombstone. What do you want written there? And we discovered that actually a lot of people hadn't even thought about that. And certainly in my profession, an awful lot of partners historically have got to retirement and got to that place where they finished their life, they spent millions of hours in the office, often had broken marriages, and then looked back and thought, why? Why what? What was it all about? And I think it's important that we create that space early for people to think about, what am I here for? Which can seem like an esoteric question that you have in university sort of dorm rooms and over glasses of wine and coffee late at night. But actually that reflection of what am I here for seems to me quite fundamentally important, because if you can connect people to what they are really passionate about and care about, and then connect that into what you are passionate in your business, then you have these wonderful threads of connection that actually replace the broken employment contracts and stuff that people don't trust anymore. So connecting people in to their purpose, to what you're trying to achieve as a business is important. We've articulated ours as how can we shape a vibrant economy? So talking about how through our influence we can make a difference. The other one is, how do you lead in a way that is actually inviting people to a world of possibilities rather than to a world of certainties? I did my coaching program, about 7 or 8 years ago, and then I did my NLP practitioner. And in both of those, it was a really wonderful light bulb moment. I don't know how many coaches have I got in the audience. How many people did it? Excellent. And I don't know about you guys, but when I first did my coaching, I suddenly had this blinding flash of oh my Lord, now I know why it's been such hard work, because I've spent my life telling people what to do, and me taking responsibility for doing all the thinking and not creating the environment for them to actually think for themselves. Was that your experience? No, you were better than me. Maybe it was just me. And so the whole sort of thing about how do we set ourselves up in our interactions with people so that we're actually inviting them to think. And I've been wonderfully inspired by a lady called Nancy Klein's work. I don't know if any of you have read her work, about how do you operate day to day that invites people to think, framing meetings around the important questions to resolve rather than just statements and updates. How do you really create the space for everybody to participate? And we've embedded those principles, we call them the getting best of our time together, into everything we do in our firm. And we're finding ideas coming from all sorts of people, because actually it creates the space for their voice to be heard, builds their confidence. And my final one in terms of that environment, I think, is about confidence. We hear a lot about disruption. And I don't know about you, I think the language we often use puts the brain into that space where it's in a place of fear. And I think that we all know that the brain, and even as individuals, we work much better when we're in a place of promise rather than a place of fear. And so how do we change that dialogue from disruption to construction, where we're actually building on people's ideas and helping them grow rather than tearing them down? And again, we've really paid attention to that so that when people put forward an idea, we have, and I don't know, it may be different in your industry, so it'll be interesting to get that feedback. But often when people came forward with an idea, people would tell them all the reasons why it was wrong and why it wouldn't work. Does that happen to anyone else? No? and I don't know about you, you have to be quite resilient to bounce back up from that. And you imagine, if you had a child, you think of, when you've got children, they're learning to walk. And, if you imagine a child sort of crawling on the floor and taking those first steps and falling over, how do we behave with them? Do we say, oh, you're rubbish at walking? Get wheels. No, we encourage them. We say, come on, you try again, get up, try again. And what if we brought that attitude into how we operate day to day? How then would people perform? How then would they flourish and grow? So how do we build that construction, that building in the environment? So those are things that we have been experimenting with culturally to get our people fit to have that openness, that inquiry, to be generative in terms of their ideas. But so what? What does that actually mean in terms of the ability to impact and change what happens in the world? Well, from a business perspective, we then sort of looked at, well, how can we shape and influence if we really want to be in a position where I've got a resilient business that's contributing positively to the world, is helping with sustainability? What are the things that we could do, that we could pay attention to? And there are 3 different elements that we really picked out. One was actually getting people to realise their power to influence. There's that wonderful quote, isn't it? Don't believe that one person can't change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And getting people's belief that actually each person caring and having ideas and then sharing those is what actually creates that maelstrom. And we've got this wonderful opportunity now with social media, haven't we? As Chris Anderson at TED Talks, TED says, it's a bad time to be evil, which I really quite like. I sort of kind of hope that. I sort of see what's happening with Donald Trump and stuff, and I really hope it's a bad time to be evil, but a bit of politics, always get to get a bit in on a Friday morning. But, getting people to think about their power and how they can use their influence has been important for us. So we encourage everybody in our firm to use social media to express their views and opinions. And actually, we hire smart people. We trust them to say sensible stuff. We don't try and stop them from expressing their views and influencing, because why would we do that? The second one is really thinking about how you can create impact in what you do. And it was really interesting for us as a firm when we started to talk about purpose and shaping a vibrant economy. A lot of stuff was, well, what credibility have we got to have a purpose like that? What's our legitimacy to have a purpose like that? And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know how you see your organisations and your worlds, but I could define my world as, oh, we're just a professional services firm and we've just got 4,500 people in the UK. I could expand my horizons a bit more and say, oh, and we've got 40,000 people around the world. Or I could look at it through the lens of who we've got the ability to support and influence in the journey of shaping a vibrant economy. And when we did that, we actually looked at, well, look, we work with 50% of the FTSE 100. The private sector clients we advise employ 6.6 million people in the UK. That's 25% of private sector employment. And we work with over 40% of the public sector. When you look at your influence really properly, you can start to think about how you can actually spread and grow and shape to do things differently. And the third thing was really thinking about how could we really convene people to actually bring together and operate in a different way. Because what we knew was that, going back right to the start, that some of the important things that are going to create growth and innovation aren't going to come from people working individually in their individual companies. It's going to come from people collaborating. And what if we could convene people around important questions in key cities around the UK, around key themes, bringing people together who are all doing great work but maybe not connected in together? What if we could do that and use that as a way to turn ideas into action? And that has been the major piece of work that we've really been leading on. And if I tell you, we started in Sheffield last May, and we had over 200 people came into the room. We had people from the mayor through to an MP who was passing by and thought it looked kind of interesting and just popped in, as they do. It was quite cool, actually. I didn't know they did that. We had some long-term unemployed who'd worked in the steel industry. We had artists, we had musicians, we had scientists, we had all sorts of interesting people in the room. A lot of them doing amazing things individually. but who hadn't actually necessarily connected. Out of that one day where we used inspiration from Cleveland, where in the States there was a city that could have been an industrial wasteland, which now has a vision to be a green city on a blue lake, involving all of the community and making stuff happen. Out of that one day, we had over 700 ideas. And by providing a platform, people have been sharing and prioritizing those and taking them forward. And I'll give you one example of the sorts of things that happen when smart people with a vision to grow and collaborate actually move forward in a different way. So Sheffield created at that day a vision that they would be an innovation centre at the heart of Europe. Still stands, I think, even post-Brexit. Innovation centre at the heart of Europe. And as part of that, they said, well, one of the things we really need to crack is our transport system, because our transport system isn't really fit for purpose anymore. And a young entrepreneur, he was probably about 20, Johnny, stood on the stage and said, well, I think that Sheffield should be the first city in the world to have the Hyperloop. You heard of Elon Musk's Hyperloop? If you haven't, Google it, it's really cool. It's the closest I think I'm ever going to get to a TARDIS, and so I'm holding out for the TARDIS, but Hyperloop will do. Now, I don't know how many of you work with public sector and people in big government and big projects and stuff. How would that normally be received? Oh, let's go for the Hyperloop. Yeah? Yeah. And what was really interesting was that idea was then actually taken where a group of the business leaders and actually the LEP and some of the local government people, they got together, and there was this, it started off with all of the, oh, well, it wouldn't work because, and then someone said, but if we really want to be the innovation centre at the heart of Europe, why wouldn't we be going for something that is really at the cutting edge of transport for tomorrow's world, not yesterday's world? So I'll leave you with that thought, that in our businesses, if we can operate with purpose, if we can really collaborate together to address some of the big challenges and be open in how we operate and be leaders who aren't perfect and don't know all the answers, then just perhaps we'll create an environment where we're not buffeted by the economy, but actually we can thrive and grow and create a future for our children. Thank you.